I was 17 when I stayed at my sister's place for the first time by myself. She lived in one of those out-of-the-way houses tucked into the edge of the woods outside Ridge Hollow, 2 miles from the nearest neighbor, 3 from anything resembling a gas station. It was peaceful in that distant, wide sky kind of way. It was peaceful until it wasn't. She and her husband had gone to visit his parents for the weekend. And since I'd just graduated and had no summer plans, I agreed to house sit. Feed the cat, grab the mail, and just keep an eye on things. That Sunday morning, around 10 or so, I was still in my pajamas, barefoot in the kitchen, half a Pop-Tart hanging out of my mouth. Then I heard it. A soft clinking noise. Like metal scraping against wood. It was faint but wrong. It's a kind of sound that doesn't belong in a quiet house surrounded by forest. At first I figured maybe it was just the cat messing around on the porch. He'd like to sneak out if someone left the screen door unlatched. But when I walked into the front room and peeked out through the slats of the blinds, my stomach dropped. There was a man on the porch. Not the mailman, not a neighbor. Some guy I'd never seen before, probably in his late 40s. Work boots, a gray flannel, even though it was already warm out, and a green baseball cap that shadowed his face. He had a length of rope in his hands, and he was threading it around the front doorknob, pulling it tight, knotting it, then tying it to the deck railing, like he was securing a boat to a dock, except the boat was me, inside, trapped. I froze, completely still, just watching, breathing as quietly as I could. He hadn't seen me yet, I was sure of it. He wasn't in a rush. He wasn't looking around or checking over his shoulder. That was what scared me most. He acted like he belonged there, like he'd done this before. I backed away from the window slowly, careful not to make a sound. My heart pounded against my ribs, a thudding pressure that filled my ears. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until I reached the hallway and finally let it out, shaky and fast. First thought, phone. I needed my phone. It was still plugged into the charger beside the couch. I dropped to my knees to stay below window height and scrambled over, grabbing it with both hands like it was a lifeline. I crouched low and crept back into the hallway. I went straight to the laundry room, the only space without windows, and shut the door behind me. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely hit the emergency dial. 911 picked up in 2 rings. 911. What's your emergency? There's a man on the porch, I whispered, kneeling beside the washing machine. He's tying the front door shut with a rope. He tied it to the deck. I'm alone here. I don't know who he is. "Okay, I need your name and address, please." I gave it. Dispatcher, her voice calm but firm, told me to stay on the line and keep myself hidden. Officers were already being dispatched. She asked if I could still see the man. "I don't know," I whispered. "I'm hiding in a back room. I think he might think I'm not home." Horrible thought hit me. What if he was coming around to the back? The back door was glass, no blinds, no curtains. It was locked, but that would only buy seconds if he tried to break it. I moved into the small pantry across the hallway and eased the door closed. It smelled like cinnamon and canned soup. I could barely fit between the shelves, but it was darker, tighter, safer. I held the phone to my ear like it was the only thing anchoring me to the world. Then I heard it again. The sound of footsteps on wood, moving along the porch. A second later, a gentle tug at the front door. Then nothing. The silence stretched on so long, I started to wonder if he'd left. My breathing was loud in my own ears, the sound amplified in the cramped pantry. I pressed the phone closer to my cheek, straining to hear past the blood rushing in my head. Then, faint but distinct, came the sound of the screen door creaking open on the other side of the house. I froze. The back porch. I mouthed into the phone, barely audible. "He's at the back now." The dispatcher's tone stayed steady. "Stay where you are. Officers are close. Do not make any noise." A pause. And then light footsteps on the deck planks. Deliberate, slow. He wasn't rushing. He was checking. Through the thin wall, I heard the faint metallic rattle of the back door handle being tested. Then, a dull thunk. Maybe his palm hitting the glass. My throat tightened so much it hurt, and I curled in on myself, gripping the phone so hard my fingers ached. A long beat of quiet followed, but I didn't dare believe it was over. The sound came again, this time at the side of the house, a shuffle of feet on gravel. My mind raced, picturing him circling, looking for another way in. The dispatcher broke in. "They're turning onto your road now. To units." Almost immediately after she said it, I caught the distant hum of engines. My chest tightened for a whole different reason, relief that was so sharp it felt painful. And then, just as I thought I was safe, there was one last sound barely audible over the growing wail of sirens. A low, gruff voice outside the side window, muttering something I couldn't make out. I didn't move, not even when the flashing lights finally poured through the curtains. When the officers arrived and I stepped out of hiding, rope still tied tight across the front door, the porch was empty. The man was gone, but his knots were perfect. Too perfect, like he'd done it before. One of the deputies, a tall, broad man named Crowder, crouched down to inspect the rope. His fingers traced the loops, the tight twists in the cord. "This isn't random," he said quietly, almost to himself. "This is a clove hitch, doubled. Can't just figure this out in 5 seconds. You have to know it." The other deputy, Ruiz, stepped off the porch and scanned the tree line. The woods pressed right up against the property, dense and dark despite it being late morning. "Tracks here," he called. "Boot prints. Big ones. Headed toward the creek." I stood back, arms wrapped around myself, watching them work. Every sound seemed sharper now, the distant caw of a crow, the crackle of leaves when Ruiz moved. Crowder straightened and met my eyes. "You didn't open the door, right?" I shook my head. No, I was going to check what the noise was, but I saw him through the window first. He looked straight at me when he realized I was there. That earned me a look between the deputies that wasn't exactly reassuring. They walked me through the house, checking every door and window. Nothing was damaged, but the back door's lock had faint, fresh scratches, as though someone had been fiddling with it. Ruiz took a closer look. "Small screwdriver, maybe a pick," he muttered. When they finally cut the rope from the front door, I noticed something I hadn't before. The cord wasn't frayed or dirty. Looked new, like it had just come out of a package. Crowder asked if I'd noticed a vehicle. I told him no, but with the woods on both sides of the gravel road, he could have easily parked out of sight before leaving. They urged me to stay inside until my sister got home, and to keep the doors locked no matter what. Crowder gave me his card, his thumb pressing it into my palm. "If you see anyone out here again, you call me directly. Understand?" I nodded, but even after they drove away, the image of that man's calm, methodical movements staying me in, wouldn't leave my mind. Because he hadn't seemed rushed. He hadn't been panicking. It looked like he had all the time in the world. It was just past noon on a warm Saturday when I heard the first scream. At first, I thought it was the TV. My kids were watching cartoons in the living room, while I was slicing vegetables in the kitchen. But then I heard the second one, sharper, higher, coming from outside. I walked toward the front window, wiping my hands on a dish towel, and froze. My neighbor Angela was stumbling down the sidewalk, her hair disheveled, blood pouring down the side of her face. One of her arms was wrapped around her head, the other flailing toward my house as she screamed my name. I dropped the towel and sprinted for the door. "Angela, what happened?" I yelled, yanking it open. She nearly collapsed into me, the smell of iron hitting my nose, before I could even register the gash above her temple. He just came in," she stammered, trembling so hard I could feel it through her soaked shirt. "I don't know him, he hit me, Her words cut off as a crash erupted behind her. I looked past her toward her house just in time to see a man, mid-30s maybe. He's wearing a dark hoodie despite the heat, climbing through her shattered front window. His movements were jerky, erratic, like every ounce of his energy was set on one thing, getting to her. Inside, now. I shoved Angela into the living room and slammed the door, locking both deadbolts. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I shouted for my kids to go upstairs and not come out, my voice so sharp it startled them into silence. Then came the pounding. Heavy, deliberate thuds on the front door. The sound of the handle rattling, then a shoulder slamming into the wood. Angela was sobbing beside me, whispering, "He won't stop. He won't stop," like she was trying to convince herself it was real. The glass in the side window exploded. I ducked, grabbing the first thing I saw, the cast iron skillet from the kitchen counter. His hand was reaching through the broken pane, fingers clawing at the latch. And then, just as suddenly as it began, he stopped. I was maybe 9, maybe 10, that summer, when my cousins and I got bored enough to wander deeper into the woods behind our grandparents' place than we ever had before. It was the middle of the day, hot enough that the air had that sticky, heavy feeling, and the cicadas were screaming so loud it almost felt like a wall of sound. There were 6 of us, all kids, ranging from my older cousin Devin at 14 down to my little sister, who was barely 6. At first, it was just another one of our dumb dares. Devin said he'd found a cool old trail past the creek, the kind of thing you had to jump across slick stones to reach. None of us thought much about it until the woods started feeling different, quieter. It's darker, even though it was still sunny overhead. As the path wound deeper, away from the usual familiar sights, until we reached a little clearing, half hidden by overgrown bushes. That's when I saw it. It was lying there in the grass, bunched up like someone had dropped it in a hurry, a shirt. At first I thought maybe it was just a rag or something, but when Devin picked it up, his face changed. The front was soaked with dark brown stains that we didn't recognize right away. Then the smell hit us iron, sour and heavy, and it was obvious blood. A lot of it. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Devin threw it down like it had burned him, muttering something about probably just an animal, even though none of us believed it. We should have turned back then, but instead we kept walking, curiosity winning out over good sense. About 20 yards farther, we found something worse. Sitting against the base of a tree was a black trash bag, tied shut tight at the top. The plastic was dirty and sun-faded, but not old. Devin poked it with a stick, and the bag shifted, light enough to move, but heavy enough that whatever was inside was just trash. Finally, after a long back and forth about whether we even wanted to know, he tore it open at the knot. Inside were clothes, folded almost neatly, a pair of white canvas shoes streaked with mud, a pair of denim shorts, small enough for either a petite woman or maybe a middle school-aged kid. There was also a tank top, pale pink, with a faint brown stain near the hem. None of them looked shredded or worn out, just used and placed there intentionally, like that. When Devin zipped the bag shut again and told us all to keep our mouths shut until we got back to the house. When we got back, we were half out of breath from the fast walk and half from the nerves of what we'd just seen. My grandmother was on the porch shelling beans, and our Uncle Mike was out back fixing a fence panel. Devin didn't waste time. He went straight to Mike and said, "We found something in the woods. It's a bloody shirt and a bag with clothes in it." Mike straightened up slowly, squinting at him like he was waiting for the punchline. But when he saw our faces, especially mine, apparently his whole expression changed. He put down the hammer and told all of us to follow him to the shed. Once inside, the smell of motor oil and dust thick in the air, he shut the door. No windows. He leaned back against it, arms crossed, and looked at us in turn. "You kids didn't see anything." Devin frowned. "What, Mike? We should know." His voice was sharp, almost snapping. "You hear me? Not a word to anyone. Not to your grandma, not to your parents, not to anybody." My little sister piped up, but it was bloody. Mike stepped forward so fast, she flinched. His voice dropped low. I said, "Drop it. You talk about this, you're going to get yourselves in trouble you don't even understand." I remember staring at him, trying to figure out what could possibly be so bad that telling an adult was suddenly dangerous. Oh, but none of us were brave enough to push it. He herded us out of the shed and told us to go play somewhere else, away from the woods. When I was an undergrad, I had a summer job at a theme park, working for a marketing firm's street team, getting people to sign up for credit cards. It was only 4 days a week, but 12-hour days. I had to be there early to get to my assignment before park open, which rotated but was inconsistent. Every day, the same security guard was at the guard station. It's an average and unassuming 35 to 40-ish man. He never said anything, but always checked my backpack by using a long wooden stick to push around the contents. I noticed only the women, although truthfully, girls working there got the thorough review. As the summer progressed, a girlfriend from school got a job at the park as well. One day, she pointed out to me that the security guard was watching me. We were on a lunch break in the backstage cafeteria. I told her he was probably on break too. We were sitting under a mounted TV. Another day, I noticed the guard standing not far from my booth in the water park. But it was well after his 8 hours should have been up. Then, the next week, I saw him by my booth in the park's wilderness territory. Later, I spotted him in the parking lot when I was leaving for the night. I mentioned it to my boss, who was a good guy, and he agreed it was weird and started walking me to my car at night. At this point, I was weirded out, but it could all be chalked up to a coincidence. Then, the last week before I would be going back to college, I left work early. It was late afternoon, but still light out. I was alone, and he met me at my car. He said he knew I liked him, and I do and remember too much more of what he said to me. But I do remember seeing his wooden stick at his side, low against his hip. I started to back away to go back to the guard shack. Then, my brick cell phone rang. It was loud and startled us both. I quickly answered and told him my boyfriend was calling and I had to go. He hit one of my tires with the stick and lurched off to his own car, grumbling to himself. My boyfriend, still on the line, wanted me to go back to the guard shack, but I just wanted to bolt. Still, I waited until he left, and then I drove home shaking. I still think about that day and what could have happened. I tried to think of why he would think I had feelings for him, since we had never exchanged more than a passing hello. I learned a lesson far too many women learned that day, and I was lucky. Be careful how nice you are to strangers. I worked part-time over the summer in a part-time job maintaining and looking after a small graveyard behind my local church. It was closed off with high walls and nobody ever entered. Really, I think I saw maybe 6 people over the space of 2 months. I never met the staff of the church. The local job office got me it and just left me to my own devices for 2 months. I kept it beautiful and even took extra care in taking down ivy off of tombstones, etc. Well, one day, as I was edging up the perimeter pathway, I started getting a weird feeling like something was watching me. There were small things before, but I just shrugged it off, like the sound of a stone being thrown near me, or an odd sound in the wind. The yard became surprisingly peaceful to me, but it would be just a sense that there was an energy to the place, that the spirits there were there, but they were resting. Unfortunately, a few days prior to the sighting, I will describe in order to clean and maintain the tomb. 2 large laying grave markers, surrounded by a wrought iron fence on a small wall. Closed off, except a secret gate hidden in the bars. I'd have to go in and step all over them. I always made it a point to say I'm very sorry and thank you for letting me take care of your grave. I had to walk on a grave for maintenance. I'd started on it before deciding it was too much work, and to return to it later after the path, as the path was priority. But as I was edging up the path, I looked up as something caught my eye. I saw a vertical plume of smoke, like a long wisp of semi-opaque white, cross the middle of the yard between my side and the other. It moved gently about 15 feet before being sucked into the ground like a whirlpool or the trap in Ghostbusters. I just stood there and stared for a good minute. Where I saw the smoke start to move along the grass. It would be about 30 to 40 feet from any wall. The walls themselves were roughly 8 feet high, maybe more. It was unsomeone as vape smoke, because I am a vapor, and even with a big cloud, it dissipates quickly, and this looked nothing like that. It was more akin to a thick fog. It kept a rough shape of something about 5 foot tall for 15 feet. Smoke generally likes to move downwards or upwards, not just move in a vertical column. It was just after lunch on a bright, quiet afternoon when I noticed something moving in my kitchen. At first I thought maybe I'd left the back door open, or that the cat had somehow gotten in and was knocking things over. But then I caught the outlined, dark hooded, moving slowly between the countertops, backlit by the sunlight streaming through the windows. My heart nearly stopped. The kitchen was supposed to be empty. I was home alone. I froze, my mind racing. The front door had been locked this morning, and I was sure no one had come in. How had this person gotten inside? Without thinking, I backed out of sight, pressing myself against the wall just outside the kitchen doorway. My fingers shook as I pulled out my phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands. The stranger was calm to calm. He moved deliberately, pulling open drawers, rifling through cupboards, checking every nook like he was searching for something specific. I caught a glimpse of his sleeve, dark, soaked in what looked like dried blood. Panic bubbled up in my chest. I whispered into the phone, describing everything, begging the dispatcher to hurry. The man suddenly stopped, turned sharply toward the window behind him. In one fluid motion, he leaped through it, shattering the glass with a crash that echoed through the house. Before I could process what had just happened, the front doorbell rang. My hands were still trembling as I cautiously answered to find the police, their faces grim but reassuring. The officers searched the property, but found no sign of the intruder. The broken window was the only evidence he'd been there. I was left shaken. my peaceful afternoon shattered by the terrifying knowledge that someone had invaded my home and left blood behind. The police took my statement in the living room, their voices calm but serious. They asked questions: how long had I been home alone, if anything was missing, if I recognized the intruder, but all I could think about was how close he'd been, how easily he'd slipped through the window, and how methodical he'd been while rummaging through my kitchen. One of the officers, a woman named Jenkins, knelt beside the broken glass and picked up a small, bloodied cloth. She bagged it carefully, her expression hard to read. "We'll run this through forensics," she said. "Hopefully, we get something to go on." I sat on the couch, still trembling. The sun was starting to lower outside, casting long shadows across the floor shadows I kept glancing at nervously, half expecting to see that hooded figure slip back inside. The officers assured me they'd increase patrols in the area and suggested I stay with a friend or family member for a few nights. But even as they left, I felt the house's quiet shift, the way it seemed emptier somehow, less safe. That night, every creak and groan of the old house sent me bolting upright in bed. I double-checked every door and window, made sure the locks were tight. But nothing could erase the memory of that shadow moving through my kitchen. Days passed, with no sign of the intruder. Neighbors said they hadn't seen anyone suspicious. But the thought that someone had been inside my home and might still be out there haunted me. I kept replaying his movements in my head, calm, precise, almost clinical. This wasn't a random break-in. He'd come for something. And until I knew what, I wasn't safe. The next day, I started to piece together what might have been missing. At first glance, nothing obvious was going to no jewelry, no electronics, but then I noticed my laptop bag was slightly out of place on the kitchen table. When I opened it, my heart sank. My external hard drive, the one where I kept backups of my work and personal files, was gone. It wasn't expensive, but it held everything: photos, documents, even some sensitive information I'd never shared with anyone. The thought that someone had been digging through my life like that sent a chill down my spine. I called the police again, gave them the update, and they promised to add it to the case file. They explained that some intruders weren't after money or valuables, but something more specific: data, information, sometimes even revenge. For days afterward, I couldn't focus on anything. Every noise made me jump. I installed new locks, set up motion sensor lights, and even bought a security camera system. But the feeling of being watched never truly left. Then, about a week later, a neighbor came by with a strange story. He'd seen a man matching the description of the intruder hanging around the alley behind our houses, acting nervous and looking over his shoulder. He disappeared before the police arrived, leaving nothing but more questions. I still don't know why that man came into my home that afternoon, what he was searching for, or how close I came to being hurt. All I know is the day I saw that hooded figure in my kitchen, my life changed. Forever shadowed by the knowledge that sometimes the threat isn't what you can see, but what you can barely feel lurking just out of sight. Weeks passed, but the unease never fully lifted. Every creak in the house, every shadow cast by passing headlights, kept my senses on edge. I started sleeping with the bedroom door locked and the security cameras recording. But even that didn't stop the anxiety from creeping in. One evening, as I reviewed the footage, I noticed something disturbing. A figure hooded like the intruder, lurking near the back of my property. It's just outside the range of the porch lights. The timestamp showed it was late at night, hours after I'd gone to bed. The figure didn't stay long, disappearing into the darkness, but that brief glimpse was enough to send my heart racing all over again. I showed the clip to the police, but without a clear face or any other evidence. They said there wasn't much they could do besides keep an eye out. Still, I felt trapped in my own home, the sense of violation never quite fading. The experience forced me to reconsider my sense of safety, reminding me that sometimes danger doesn't come with a bang or a scream. It creeps in silently. It's unseen until it's almost too late. It was a warm, clear afternoon when I first noticed a man in a dirty, oversized coat, slowly pacing the edge of our property. At first, I thought he might be a utility worker or a lost hiker from the nearby trail. But something about the way he kept glancing toward the house made my stomach tighten. Over the next week, I saw him again and again. Always in daylight, always drifting along the tree line, as if testing how close he could get without me stepping outside. My parents brushed it off, saying he was probably harmless, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was just passing through. He was watching us. One Thursday, just after lunch, I caught movement from the kitchen window. He wasn't at the edge of the property this time. He was halfway across the yard, walking directly toward our shed. My heart started pounding. I grabbed my phone and called my dad, who was working from home upstairs, then ran to the back door. By the time we got outside, the man had vanished. The shed door was slightly ajar. Dad approached carefully, yanking it open. Empty. We called the police. They searched the shed but didn't find him, at least not right away. What they did find stopped them: cold, crudely carved symbols gouged into the wooden floor, arranged in a ring. In the corner sat a pile of small bones, too many to be from one animal. Some were bleached white, others still had fragments of dried sinew. Then there was the backpack stuffed with random belongings, a wallet with no ID, a child's hairbrush, several watches, and a pair of women's shoes with dark stains on the soles. The officer told us to lock everything and stay inside while they searched the surrounding area. I never caught him. And even now, in the middle of the day, I still find myself glancing toward that shed, half expecting to see him standing there again, watching. The police kept the shed locked with crime scene tape for almost a week, but every time I passed the window, I swore I saw shadows in there. My parents told me it was just my imagination, leftover nerves from the encounter, but the feeling didn't fade. When the officers finally cleared the scene and removed the tape, my dad insisted on burning the floorboards. He didn't want that mess staying on our property, and I could tell from the tightness in his jaw that he didn't. Believed for a second that the man wouldn't come back. The night after the boards were ripped out, I woke to the faint creak of our back steps. I froze in bed, straining to hear. The sound was slow, deliberate, almost hesitant. I grabbed my phone and crawled to the window, keeping low. The motion sensor light wasn't on, but the moonlight caught something just the edge of that filthy coat, disappearing around the corner of the house. I whispered for my dad and we called 911 again. By the time the police arrived, there were fresh footprints in the damp grass, leading straight from the shed to the back porch. The officers searched the property, but didn't find anyone. One of them, a tall, older guy with a grim look, pulled my dad aside. "You're not the only house that's had problems with someone like this," he said quietly. "Keep your doors and windows locked. If you see him again, don't confront him. Call us immediately." The next morning, I noticed something the police had missed on the shed's new floor. Right where the carved symbols used to be, someone had etched a single mark into the fresh wood. It wasn't big, just a small, jagged X, but it looked deliberate, like he was telling us he'd been back. My stomach dropped when I saw it. The edges of the X were too clean to be accidental. It had been scratched by a tool we owned. I didn't say anything to my parents right away. Part of me thought maybe I was overreacting, that pointing it out would only make them more paranoid than they already were. The more I stared at it, the more wrong it felt. That night the wind picked up, rattling the trees outside my window. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I caught it again, the sound of the back steps, groaning under someone's weight. I froze, eyes wide open, ears straining. A moment later, the motion light flicked on. Through the thin gap in my curtains, I could see his shadow stretching across the yard. It wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the house. The shape of his hood was unmistakable. I reached for my phone with shaking hands and called 911, whispering my address. But as soon as I glanced back, the light clicked off, plunging the yard into darkness. The dispatcher kept me on the line until officers arrived. They swept the yard again, even checking the nearby woods. But just like before, he was gone. After they left, I went to lock the back door one more time and saw something that made my chest tighten. Right in the middle of the glass pane, smeared in something brownish red, was another X. This one wasn't carved. It looked painted. I backed away from the door so fast, I nearly tripped over the rug. My first thought was blood, but I told myself it could have been mud, thick, dark, and smeared just enough to make my brain jump to the worst-case scenario. Still, the smell hit me a moment later. Metallic. Sharp. I didn't need a lab test to know what it really was. I called my parents into the kitchen. My dad's face tightened the second he saw it, and my mom instinctively reached for the phone again to call the police. When the officers showed up, they took photos, swabbed the stain, and started asking me questions. Had I seen anyone since the last time they came? Is there any reason someone might target our family? I didn't have answers. While one officer was talking to us, the other went to check the shed. When he came back, his expression was differentcome on the surface, but his eyes kept darting toward my dad like he didn't want to say something in front of me. Eventually, my dad convinced him to just spit it out. That's when he told us. Inside the shed, someone had carved dozens of symbols into the floorboard, spirals, jagged lines, and something that looked like a crude, horned figure. In one corner was a pile of small bones. Some were from animals, but others, he said, they couldn't immediately identify. Next to the bones was a faded, dirt-caked backpack. When they opened it, they found jewelry, IDs, and scraps of clothing, all from different people. None of us recognized a single item. That was when it stopped feeling like someone just messing with us. This was deliberate, and it had been happening for a lot longer than we thought. The police sealed off the shed with yellow tape and told us to stay inside. From the kitchen window, I could see them moving around in the yard, taking pictures, bagging evidence. Every so often, one of them would glance toward the tree line like they were expecting someone to be watching from there. I couldn't stop thinking about the man I'd seen earlier, the way he disappeared inside the shed like he belonged there. Like it wasn't the first time he'd been in our yard. The realization sank in hard. He had probably been coming and going for weeks, maybe months, without us noticing. When one of the detectives came back inside, he started asking about neighbors, cameras, anything unusual. My dad mentioned the trail of flattened grass near the fence we denoticed a few days ago. The detective's jaw tightened. He said it looked like someone had been using the same path over and over to get in and out. Before leaving, he warned us to keep every door locked, even during the day. They'd be doing patrols in the area, but he made it clear whoever this guy was. He was bold enough to move around in full daylight, and patient enough to build something disturbing right under our noses. That night, none of us slept much. Every creak of the house, every shadow outside the window, made my stomach knot. The shed sat just 20 yards from the back door, and I couldn't stop picturing it dark inside, symbols cut into the floor, bones stacked like some kind of twisted trophy case. Somewhere out there, the man who put them there was still free. It was just past 10 in the morning when I stepped outside to get the mail. The sun was bright, birds were chirping, and everything felt perfectly normal. That is, until I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Carlson, struggling just a few yards from her front porch. She was pinned against the fence by a man I'd never seen before. His face was obscured by a baseball cap, but the rage in his eyes was unmistakable. In his hand, he gripped a thick metal pipe, heavy and smeared with what looked like fresh blood. I froze, heart pounding as I watched the brutal scene unfold. The man swung the pipe again, catching Mrs. Carlson across the ribs. She cried out, collapsing to the ground, clutching her side. The attacker didn't hesitate. He raised the pipe once more and struck the fence beside her with a deafening crack. Then, without warning, he turned toward my house. Before I could react, the pipe smashed against my front door's window, shattering glass everywhere. I stumbled backward, the shards cutting through the morning light like a sudden storm. The man didn't say a word. He didn't run. Instead, he calmly wiped the pipe on his shirt, took a slow step back, and disappeared down the street like nothing had happened. I called 911 with shaking hands, barely able to catch my breath. The dispatcher's voice was steady, asking for details, while I kept my eyes on the shattered glass sparkling across my porch. I told her everything I'd seen: the attack, the man's calm retreat, the blood on the pipe. Minutes later, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each heartbeat. When the police arrived, they rushed over to Mrs. Carlson, who was now sitting on her porch steps, pale but conscious. She was clutching her side, wincing with every breath, but insisted she was okay, just a nasty bruise, she said, though the bloodstains told a different story. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, asking if anyone else had seen the man or noticed anything suspicious earlier that day. No one had. It was as if he'd appeared out of nowhere, unleashed chaos, then vanished into thin air. I stood there, replaying the scene in my head, the randomness of it all. The sheer audacity of someone attacking in broad daylight, wielding a heavy weapon without a care. It felt like the neighborhood's safety had been shattered just as thoroughly as my front window. That day, the usual hum of morning life was replaced by whispered conversations and cautious glances. People locked their doors tighter, watched the streets more carefully, and I couldn't shake the feeling that, despite the police presence, the man could be back, anywhere. It was a typical sunny afternoon. It's the kind where the light filters through the kitchen window just right, warming the whole room. I was chopping vegetables for lunch when I caught a flicker out of the corner of my eye. A small black dog darted across the living room floor, moving fast and low like it was chasing something, or maybe just racing for the joy of it. I blinked and turned around, expecting to see my own dog, Max, who usually followed me around like a shadow. But there he was, right beside me, wagging his tail calmly as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Confused, I called out, "Max, did you just run through here?" He looked up at me, tail still wagging, and barked softly. I scanned the living room, no other dogs, no toys in motion. Just empty air where that black blur had disappeared. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But the feeling stuck with me all afternoon, the sense that I wasn't alone, that something unseen was moving through the house with a restless energy. Days later, chatting with the neighbors, I learned something that sent a chill down my spine. The previous owners had a small black dog that looked exactly like the one I saw. They'd buried him right in the backyard after he passed away peacefully. Since then, I've caught glimpses here and there, a flash of black fur in the corner of a room. It's the faint sound of paws on hardwood when no one's home. Max doesn't seem bothered. Sometimes he even looks toward the spots I can't see. Whatever it is, it feels like the house remembers. And maybe, in its own quiet way, so do I. Days turned into weeks, and the sightings didn't stop. The little black dog appeared at the oddest moments, darting under the dining table, circling the living room couch, or simply sitting by the window, staring outside with an intensity that felt almost human. One afternoon, I was sitting on the porch when Max suddenly perked up, his ears twitching as he stared toward the house. I followed his gaze and caught a glimpse of that same black blur slipping behind the curtains. Curious, I moved inside and checked every corner. But there was nothing there, just the familiar shadows cast by the afternoon sun. I started asking around, wanting to know more about the previous owners and their dog. A neighbor told me that the dog's name was Shadow, and that he had been a loyal companion, always close by, especially to the elderly couple who lived there before us. They said Shadow had passed suddenly, but the grief over him lingered long after. Some even joked that the house hadn't quite let him go. One evening, as I was cleaning the kitchen, I heard a soft scratching at the back door. Max was nowhere near it, so I went to see what it was. Their paw prints pressed lightly into the dust on the porch, fresh and unmistakably canine. But when I opened the door, there was nothing outside. That night, I slept with the porch light on, comforted only by the steady breathing of Max at my feet. Whatever this presence was, whether memory, spirit, or something else, it was gentle. Watching, waiting. A quiet reminder that some bonds don't break, not even with death. A few nights later, I woke suddenly to the sound of faint scratching again, this time, coming from inside the house. Heart pounding, I turned on the bedside lamp and listened. The noise was coming from the living room, soft but persistent, like claws tapping against the wooden floor. I crept out of bed and followed the sound, each step slower than the last. As I reached the living room, the noise stopped. The room was empty, except for a small dark shape curled up near the fireplace. I blinked and it was gone. Max was asleep in his bed, snoring softly. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but there was nothing but the faint glow of the nightlight and the shadows it cast on the walls. From then on, I accepted that Shadow, the little black dog I never met, but somehow knew was part of the house's story now. Silent guardian, a restless spirit, a reminder that some presences never truly leave. I've driven that stretch of highway more times than I can count. It's a quiet rural road, nothing more than 2 lanes winding through fields and patches of forest. Familiar landmarks: an old barn, a weathered sign, a lone church steeple, marked the miles between towns. So when I rounded a bend one bright afternoon and saw a cluster of buildings rise up where there was usually nothing but open fields, I slammed on the brakes. At first I thought maybe I'd missed a turn, or there was new construction I hadn't heard about.
What?
But this wasn't some suburban sprawl or a new development. It looked like a full-on town, complete with a main street, a general store, even kids playing on the sidewalk. The sun glinted off a red fire hydrant, and a rusty mailbox sat near a white picket fence. The smell of fresh bread seemed to float on the breeze. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The town was still there. I pulled over, heart racing, and stepped out of the car, expecting to hear the chatter of people or see someone wave hello. But the air was eerily silent. No sounds of traffic, no dogs barking, just a stillness that felt heavy and wrong. I called out, "Hello." My voice sounded strange against the quiet. No answer. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the town started to fade. Buildings blurred and dissolved, the kids vanished mid-play, the mailbox and hydrant disappeared into thin air. Within seconds, I was staring again at empty fields, the road stretching out before me exactly as it always had. I got back into my car, heart pounding. Was I seeing things? Had I driven into some kind of trick of the light? But the memory of that town, the vivid colors, the fresh bread scent, the children laughing stuck with me long after the fields returned. On the morning of June 13, 2001, the Jolkowski residence located on 48th and Bedford Street in Omaha, Nebraska would be filled with the cadence of a telephone ringing. The sound was quickly carried throughout the home and almost instantly stimulated the ears of 19-year-old Jason Jolkowski. Jason rose to his feet and made a beeline towards the phone, and upon reaching it, he brought it to his ear, revealing a familiar voice. Jason's boss rested on the other end of the line, and his voice soon traveled through the receiver, delivering a simple request. "Can you come in early today?" After a brief hesitation, knowing that his car was in the garage, hindering his means of transportation, Jason broke the silence once more and said he would ask a coworker for a ride and that he would call him back soon. Within this idea, Jason gave birth to an unsolved disappearance, leaving many still searching for answers to this day. Jason Jolkowski was born on June 24, 1981, to Kelly Murphy and Jim Jolkowski in Grand Island, Nebraska. Jason was known to have had a learning disability related to speech and language. It sometimes took him longer than others to process what someone was trying to say. But despite this, and what some may see as a shortcoming, Jason was characterized as having higher than average intelligence. This characteristic was evident in his expansive knowledge of sports trivia. His mother would explain in an interview on the Unfound podcast, he was like a walking sports trivia dictionary of sorts. Could say who won the World Series in 1953, and he would know the answer. Jason's mother, Kelly, would also explain that he was shy and quiet and kept to a small group of friends. He was not involved in drugs or alcohol and was very close to his family. By age 19, Jason stood at 6 feet 1 inch tall and weighed around 165 pounds, with brown hair and brown eyes. After graduating from Benson High School, Jason worked part-time at a local Italian fast food restaurant named Fazolius while he attended Iowa Western Community College. Although Jason had a known speech and comprehension impairment, he surprised his mother Kelly and family when he decided to major in radio broadcasting at Iowa Western. While attending college, Jason would form his own persona and soon find himself hosting the college radio station. Jason's mother Kelly recalls that he made a big splash with one of his first broadcasts. As she listened in, she was presented with an extended period of silence, and she couldn't help but think to herself he must be missing a button or something. Before long, Jason would make the necessary correction, and his voice would carry across the radio broadcast, falling upon the ears of all that were listening. Jason would quickly grow a following and grow his radio personality. Jason Jolkowski on air was a completely different person, a 180-degree turn from the shy, introverted 19-year-old that his former high school classmates might have known. Jason was looking forward to late June 2001, when he would start his new job at a local radio station. He was ecstatic at the opportunity. His hard work had finally paid off, and he would be able to put his skills to use in front of a new audience. Sadly, a phone call on the morning of June 13, 2001, led to a life-changing event that would take this opportunity away from him forever. On the morning of June 13, 2001, the bellowing of rings could be heard carrying throughout the Jolkowski residence. It was a familiar noise and one that Jason was quick to respond to. Once he brought the receiver to his ear and delivered his greetings, Jason was hit with a familiar voice. His boss at Fazoli's, located on 80th and Cass St in Omaha, met him with a plea. "Can you come in early today?" Jason hesitated and paused for a moment, thinking to himself, "My car's in the garage. I guess I could walk to work." But that would take over an hour. Finally, Jason broke the silence once more and said he would ask a coworker for a ride and call him back. Jason was able to contact a local coworker and arrange for a ride. Being notorious for giving bad directions, his coworker and himself agreed to meet on common grounds at a high school they both graduated from, Benson High School. Benson High School is located on Maple St. in Omaha, Nebraska, sitting just 8 blocks away from the Jolkowski residence. The route that Jason would take to reach the parking lot was all so familiar to him. He knew it like the back of his hand. Jason had made this walk countless times growing up, and the residents, who lived in the houses that lined the street that he would walk, more than likely knew him too. Jason had agreed to meet his coworker at 11 a.m., and knowing that the walk to Benson High School would take him roughly 15 minutes, he spent his final moments finishing up some chores. Jason's brother Michael and a fellow neighbor recall watching. Jason retrieved garbage cans from the curb and returned them to the garage before departing with his red Fazoli's t-shirt in his hand to meet his ride. By the time 11:15 a.m. rolled around, his coworker grew impatient, and as the time neared 11:30 a.m., she became worried. Jason's coworker exited her vehicle, destined for a nearby phone. She found an available line at a nearby gas station and called the Jolkowski residence. Firstly, Michael answered the phone pretending to be Jason. But when he noticed the panic in her voice, he quickly dropped the act and soon became just as concerned. Jason had never made it to the high school at the agreed time. Michael would tell Jason's coworker that he had left more than a half hour ago and suggested that he should be there any moment. After her conversation with Michael, Jason's coworker phoned her boss at Fazoli's, and he would have her return. Jason Jolkowski has not been seen since. Jason's family would report him missing 24 hours later, abiding by the common waiting period set up at the time. Initially believing he was a possible runaway, police failed to open a formal investigation until 10 days after Jason's disappearance. Many agree that the hesitancy more than likely missed crucial details and possible evidence in Jason's case. During the formal investigation, police interviewed Jason's coworker, clearing her of any involvement in his disappearance. Police reviewed footage from security cameras that blanketed the Benson High School campus, making it apparent that Jason Jolkowski never made it to the school.